Okay, so we just did our bell ringer. If you haven't done it, go do it. Let's pull up our guided notes and get started. What are we talking about today? Today, we should be able to compare and contrast embryological and homologous and analogous structures. There are like three new words in there that we've never seen before, so let's learn them. Real good news, well, maybe good news, maybe bad news, it depends on your opinion. Before we get into it, this is our last standard in life science, which is crazy. So after this lesson, on Monday we're going to review, Tuesday we're going to take a short test, and then on Thursday we're going to start earth science. So if you didn't like life science, this is good news, we're moving on. If you like life science, we'll say this is also good news because then you'll probably like earth science even more. We had a lot of fun with earth science last year, so I think this group will feel the same. Okay, so let's get into it. So we've been talking about evolution, right? We've been talking about that nonstop. And again, evolution is just a population of a species changing over a long, long period of time. Okay, so one key idea of the theory of evolution that I really want to touch on is that since species have changed over time to form new species or to change how they look now, part of the theory of evolution is that we are all closely related because we all come from a common ancestor. Now, what the heck am I talking about? What does that mean? So, obviously, when you think about people that you are related to, think about if you have a brother or a sister, you guys share a very, very, very common ancestor, which is your parents. So you two are very closely related. If you have a cousin, you and your cousin are also very closely related, but you're not as closely related as you are to your brother and sister, right? Because your common ancestor is a little farther off. It's usually the brother or sister of your parent. So even though you're still related, you're not as closely related. So part of the theory of evolution is that we are all related with all the species in the world in some way or another. Just think about like the Lion King, the circle of life, how we're all connected. It's the same thing, we're all connected. However, we share a more common ancestor or we're more closely related to certain species than to others. So if you look, you'll often see pictures like this. It depicts like the tree of life. It kind of shows how we are closely related to some species and more distantly related to other species. So if you ever see a tree like this, like here's a person, the branch that you're closest to, this is like a branch on that tree of life, the closer another species branches to us, the closer we are related to them, or a more common ancestor we have. So like we're closely related to like this gorilla, but we're not as closely related to the frog, which we're even farther away from a fly, okay? So that's all that this is saying. And of course, like I said, all species are connected in some sort of way. So here's a big tree of life showing a bunch of different species. That's what we're talking about when we say common ancestry or common ancestor. So why do we think that this is the case? Like, where did this crazy idea even come from? Like, it's fun and all, but what does that mean? So there are many pieces of evidence for this common ancestry or for this theory of evolution that scientists know and look at and study. And one major thing that scientists study is by studying comparative anatomy. Let me make this bigger. Okay, so what is comparative anatomy? Let's break these words down because it sounds tricky, but it's really easy. So comparative, we know what the word compare means. We're just looking at two or more things and seeing how they're similar or different. And that's what comparative is. And anatomy, you may have heard the word anatomy before, maybe not, but anatomy is just a type of science where you're looking at the bones or the structures of a living thing. So they are just looking and comparing the bones of different species. So if you look at the similarities and differences between a bunch of different species, we can see some evidence that we're closely related. You still might be like, I don't know about that. That seems kind of fishy. I don't know what you even mean. Let's take a look. So different types of, let me move myself, different types of structures are going to tell scientists and us different things about those species. So the first type of structure we're going to talk about is that one that starts with the H, the homologous structures. Now, we have seen the word homologous before, and I know you automatically thought that when you saw that word, you're like, I got this already. So homologous is, well, we talked about homologous chromosomes, right? So we talked about how what is going on here? Let me fix this. Okay, we talked about how the prefix homo, that just means same. So these are structures that are the same or are very similar. So if we look at these bones in this picture here we have the bones of the arm of a human, we have the bones of the leg of a cat, we have the bones of a fin of a whale, and the bones of the wing of a bat. Okay, so these different structures, and we're obviously looking at 4 different species here because we are not the same as a cat. These structures are very similar. So here we have one type of bone in our arm, and cats will have that same exact type of bone. Same with the whale and the bat. They might be a little bit differently shaped, but they are the exact same bone. We call it the humerus. And these are all names of bones. You're going to learn all about these if you take anatomy in high school or in college. So we're not going to focus on the names of the bones really. We just need to focus on the fact that they have the same bones, right? Same with these bones colored in orange. They're the same bone structures in all of these different species. However, they are different in function. So what does that mean? When we say function, that just means like what it can do. What is that structure actually used for? So while these bones are all very similar or the same, what we use them for is different. So a human arm, think of what you do with your human arm. You use it to pick up stuff, use it to wave, use it to high five. Hopefully you don't use it to punch, but that is what your human arm is able to do. If you think about the cat's arm, it doesn't totally use the same function. The cat uses those bones to walk. We don't really walk on our human hands. You can, but not for very long and not forever. Same with a whale. A whale's definitely different. Although it's the same bone structure, they use it to swim. They can't really grip things or punch things. So it's all different. And a bat uses it to fly. So the function of all of these structures is different. However, the structure is the same. So what I want us to do when we see homologous structure, we think homo. Homo means same. So same structure. Homo, structure. So they are similar in structure. One key thing that I want us to take away from today, if you remember anything from today's lesson, anything at all, remember this. The more similar two structures are, so in this case like the bones, the more similar those structures are, the more likely that these two species have a common ancestor. So they are very closely related. The more different the structures look, the more distantly related those two species are going to be. So if you have two species with homologous structures, they are going to be closely related. They come from a common ancestor. Okay, so the other type of structure that we're going to talk about is the opposite of homologous structure, and these are our analogous structures. So opposite of the prefix homo, ana means different. So these are differently shaped structures. So if you look at this picture down here, we have a butterfly wing and a bird wing. Now this bird wing, it has all types of bones and it's got a lot going on, but a butterfly wing, butterflies don't even have bones. So they're both wings, but they're totally built differently. Butterfly wings are thin and they're crisp and you can rip them. They're almost like paper. So they are not built the same. However, they do have the same function, which is the opposite of these homologous structures. Remember, these all complete different jobs. They're used for different things. But analogous structures, they are used for the same thing. So a butterfly uses its wings to fly, to get around, and same thing with a bird wing. It uses that structure to fly and get around, but they are built differently. So when you see Anna, think Anna structures, different structures. So they are not built the same. Now, since they are not built the same, since the structures themselves are different from each other, these two species are not very closely related. They have not evolved from a common ancestor. Okay, so homo means same structure. Anna means different structure. Okay, those two are the hardest to get down, I think, so we're going to get a lot of practice with them, and these next two are a little bit easier, so no stress. Next, and this is the coolest one, I think, we're going to talk about vestigial structures. Vestigial, that's kind of a weird word. So vestigial structures, these are body parts that we currently have, or other living things have them too. Body parts that we currently have that have lost their function over time. So at one point in history, like a long time ago, thousands and thousands of years, these body parts did have a purpose. They did do something for us, but now they're just kind of there taking up space, right? So the perfect example of a good vestigial structure is your goosebumps. You know when you get really cold and you get those little bumps on your arms and your hair kind of stands on end? So right now that doesn't really serve a purpose for us. We just kind of get goosebumps when we're cold. But way, way back in the day when we didn't really live inside, when we were living outside, this actually served the purpose of making our hair stand on end to warm us up a little bit. It kind of created more heat on your body. So obviously back then it served a big purpose. It helped keep you warm, it helped keep you alive. But now that we're inside, we've got the heat, we don't really need those goosebumps anymore. Same thing with your appendix. A long time ago, scientists think that our appendix must have served some type of purpose for digesting our food. But right now, we just kind of have it to have it. It doesn't really do anything in our body. It just kind of sits there. You may have heard of people who have appendicitis, or they had their appendix rupture, so they had to get it out. So that's really the only thing your appendix is doing for you now, is causing you pain. So that's kind of annoying. But your appendix, that's a vestigial structure. Or last good one, if you have ever had wisdom teeth, or you feel like your wisdom teeth are coming in, back in the day when we had a more rougher diet, because we were doing a lot more hunting of like actual big live animals, we needed those back teeth to help grind down those food. Now we don't really need them anymore. So over time, they're kind of disappearing, but some of us, they're still popping up. So sometimes when they pop up, we don't really have room for it because our jaws have gotten a little bit smaller over time. So they really are just kind of a pain, and they push on your back teeth. So that's why he's saying, I'm sorry, I can't help it. I just come in. So your wisdom teeth, those are vestigial structures. So they used to have a job, they used to have a function, but we don't really need them anymore. But they're just kind of hanging out. Okay, last one. I think this one's a little creepy, so bear with me. So last thing that scientists will look at to see some evidence of that evolution, or evidence that we are closely related to one another, is by looking at the embryos of different species. We may have heard the word embryo before, maybe not. What is it? An embryo is just an unborn or unhatched, if you come from an egg, like a chicken or something, an unborn or unhatched offspring in the process of development. So basically, as soon as you are conceived, or as soon as right after that sexual reproduction takes place and the egg and the sperm makes a fertilized zygote, over time, you start to grow and develop. You don't just suddenly become this giant baby, right? It takes some time. You grow. So same thing with all living organisms. You start out as this embryo, and you slowly develop into the human animal that you are today, right? So what scientists do is we look at how different embryos for different species compare to one another. We call this embryology. So that's pretty easy because it looks like embryo, and if you ever see the suffix ology, that just means like the science or study of. So embryology, we're studying these embryos. So they look at the different embryos for different species. As you can see, we've got a fish, a tortoise, a chick, a rabbit, and a human. So when we start out, we all look almost identical. Like if these weren't labeled, I would have no idea what species these embryos belong to. But as we start to develop into what's eventually going to be the new baby offspring, you can see more of those specific traits for that species come to be. So like the fish, it's starting to look more like a fish. The turtle, you're starting to see more of a turtle. We're starting to look a little bit more like a human. Kind of looks like an alien to me, but whatever. You can see us start to develop. So same thing with the bones of the species. Scientists look at how similar our embryos are to one another as they develop. So the more an embryo looks like another species, the more likely those two species are closely related. So like if you look at a human right here and the fish, our embryos don't really look that similar, right? So we're not very closely related to the fish. We don't really share a common ancestor. But if you look at that rabbit, which it makes sense because humans and rabbits are both mammals, so you can already assume that we're probably closely related. The human and the rabbit embryo, they look very similar. Even right up to the end of development, before they're born, they look very similar. So us and the rabbit, we do share a common ancestor. We're closely related. So those are all pieces of evidence for evolution. You've got your homologous, homo means same, analogous, ana means different. You've got your vestigials, those are on your body. And you've got the embryology when you're looking at the different embryos. The one thing you really, really, really want to take away from today, like if you take away one thing, this is it. The more similar those structures or embryos look to each other, the more likely that they have evolved from each other or share a common ancestor. Okay, I just threw a lot of crazy stuff at you. So if you're like, Miss Long, you're talking crazy for like 15 minutes straight, I'm so lost, what does any of this mean? It's too much for my brain. Just let me know. I will gladly go through all of this with you again over Google Meet or in the comments or whatever you need. So let me know. If not, if you're like, nah, I totally get it, you're good until tomorrow. So I'll see you then.